Will the US confront Russia on alleged bounty killings in Afghanistan? The Kremlin says it's fake news, and President Trump denies being told about them. Members of Congress are calling for answers. How could the controversy shape efforts to end America's longest war? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan. Russia is denying paying fighters linked to the Taliban in Afghanistan to kill US troops. The allegation is triggering renewed debate on Donald Trump's strategy to end the war and his relationship with Vladimir Putin. The New York Times says investigators focused in part on a Taliban attack that killed 3 US Marines and an Afghan contractor near an American Army base. Intelligence reports were given to the White House as early as February. President Trump denies being told about them. Members of Congress want to know why they weren't told either. A Kremlin official told Inside Story that the bounty-killing claims are fake news. Alan Fisher reports from Washington.
From the White House podium, a denial the president was ever briefed on the so-called bounty kills.
Look, I'll say this, that the U.S. receives thousands of reports a day on intelligence, and they are subject to strict scrutiny. While the White House does not routinely comment on alleged intelligence or internal deliberations, the CIA director, NSA, National Security Advisor, and the Chief of Staff can all confirm that neither the president nor the vice president were briefed on the alleged Russian bounty intelligence.
Afghanistan is America's longest war. American troops have been there for 19 years. And despite talks of a peace deal, there's no indication they'll leave anytime soon. America helped contribute weapons to push Russia out of the country in the 1980s and killed Russian mercenaries in Syria 2 years ago. Now, according to the New York Times, it's payback time. The newspaper says the Russians offered cash for kills, coalition soldiers in general, American soldiers in particular. But from the Kremlin, another denial.
First of all, those statements are lies. Secondly, if in the United States special services are still answerable to the US president, then I suggest focusing on President Trump's statement. He already gave an appraisal of those reports.
He did, in a tweet. Intel just reported to me that they did not find this info credible and therefore did not report it to me or VP, possibly another fabricated Russia hoax. That, says the White House, explains why there has been no response from the American side. The story didn't stand up. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers have demanded an intelligence briefing focused on who knew what and when, and if the president was in fact briefed. Intelligence sources tell media outlets not only is the information solid, it was given to the highest level of the White House. But there's still a lot of unanswered questions. And while they remain unanswered, there lies potential risk to a president who's had a difficult relationship with Russia from even before he took office. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera.
Let's bring in our guests from Washington, D.C., Richard Weitz, defense expert at the Wikistrat Global Consultancy. From Moscow, Nikolay Surkov, senior research fellow at the Primakov Institute of World Economy and International Relations. And from Kabul, Omar Zaghilwal, former ambassador of Afghanistan in Islamabad and a former minister of finance. A warm welcome to you all. Let's start in Washington, D.C. with Richard Weitz. There's really 2 issues here, isn't there, Richard? Firstly, there's the one of the president denying that he was actually told about these allegations. There are US reports suggesting that he was actually told about them on February 27th. He says he wasn't. And then there's the actual Russian stance itself. The Russians are actually paying bounties to the Taliban for US skulls, effectively. Let's get to the first one first. Why this reaction from the president? Do you think he wasn't told, or do you think he's lying?
Sure, I would actually beg to differ. I think the most important question is what happened, and then what are the implications for Russian policy in the region, Russian-U.S. relations. But to answer your specific question, we don't know yet. They can certainly find out if this material was included in the presidential brief, but we don't know if he read it. We don't know if a person briefed it to him orally. He has alternative sources of information he uses. So that will, that's something that can be perhaps resolved, but we may never know. But again, I think the most important question is, what does this mean for the future of Russia-US relations, the future of Afghanistan going forward?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question, and we will get into that. But I have to say, you just said that the president has alternative sources of information. Alternative to the CIA? I mean, they're pretty good.
Yes, but we know it makes mistakes. We saw that with the Iraq War and so on. His modus vivendi is to draw on personal envoys, what he gets from the media, friends, family, business experts. So he gets a wide range of sources of information, and it's possible this was included in what he got from the CIA, but whether it stood out to him or whether he wasn't convinced of the credibility, or whether the people who briefed them maybe said doubts. We just don't know that yet. That can be sorted out, but they need to go back, look at the records, and so on.
Nikolay Surkov in Moscow. We were told by a Kremlin official that this was simply fake news. Is that the general attitude of the Kremlin?
Well, good afternoon. Yes, I think this is the general attitude of the Kremlin and of the experts in Moscow, because this whole story looks like a very clumsy provocation from the Russian perspective. We know that there is very tense competition in the light of the coming presidential elections. So I think the opponents of Donald Trump are simply using every opportunity to show that he's a bad president, that he's not suitable for his job. This is the main goal of this publication, because even the authors of this article, they actually pointed out that the motivations for such an activity are not clear, and that the sources of this information were not very reliable. So, usually respectable newspapers don't publish articles of that kind. This is very strange, because if this accusation turns to be true, then it will be a major blow for US-Russia relations.
But you can understand
nobody wants that in Moscow. Actually, as far as I know, Moscow is looking for ways to improve relations with the US and to cooperate whenever it's possible. For example, in Syria, on counterterrorism. So I don't think that Moscow will risk having another round of tense relations with the West just to make to achieve some strange goals in Afghanistan. Clearly, nobody understands what will this kind of behavior, I mean, providing bounties to Taliban fighters, what will it bring to Russia? What kind of benefits?
Well, let's find out from Afghanistan. We have Omar Zaghilwal, who is the former ambassador of Afghanistan to Islamabad. Welcome to the show. Now, it's an interesting question, isn't it? The Afghan government, have been negotiating now with the Taliban for a long time. Those negotiations have gone very slowly. The Taliban have been emboldened because they do have alleged support from Pakistan, for example, and now these allegations that they may have had support from Russia as well. Has this emboldened the Taliban, and do you believe the reports of Russian support to the Taliban?
First of all, to correct, the Afghan government has not started negotiations with the Taliban. It's the US Taliban who've completed negotiations. There's still the US Taliban who negotiate to start the intra-Afghan negotiations. With respect to the recent article on the Russian involvement, to be honest with you, I do not find it credible. We need to look at it in a broader picture. Reading the recent book by a former U.S. National Security Advisor, Ambassador Bolton, in which on Afghanistan, he highlights really deep disagreements and differences within the administration on peace talks with the Taliban and on the status of U.S. forces in Afghanistan, whether it should be a complete withdrawal or some sort of a residual forces should remain. So you would suspect that perhaps those differences have played some role in this intelligence, if indeed this was intelligence, whether this was a factual intelligence or it was generated intelligence, to shed doubts on the U.S. administration, talk with the Taliban, and perhaps change the nature of it. The timing of it is also a bit doubtful. Why would Russia pay Taliban now in 2020 when Russia, at least on the Afghan issue, has narrowed its gap with the U.S. Compared to where it used to be? And we know that peace in Afghanistan will have to be in the first best of Russia. We also know that Russia does support the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan. So if a result of a settlement that happens, then the Russia should support it. Why at such a critical time the Russia will come in and pay the Taliban? And then, of course, it's not going to be kept secret. Taliban is not a small group or something that if the Russia pays that it will remain secret. And at the same time, no doubt that the Taliban have contacts with regional countries. They do receive support, but they're not mercenaries. You will not see Taliban if they were mercenaries. Then the Taliban paid will target U.S. interests not only in Afghanistan but outside Afghanistan as well, and that you do not see to be the case throughout the past 20 years. So
well, let's bring in Richard Weitz here in Washington, D.C. to respond to a couple of those. What our guests in Moscow and Kabul are pouring scorn on the reports that the Taliban are mercenaries and they would have accepted money for all of this. So is the issue now then, getting back to this, not just Russia's role within Afghanistan, but the Russian relationship with America and with President Donald Trump? He certainly has a relationship with Vladimir Putin. Whether it's a good one or not, we're not sure. But he seems to often take the side of the Russians when it comes to things like this. Is there a problem there?
Well, I actually find the reports possible, credible, and so on. There has been an active Russian Taliban talks. The Russians confirmed this. They've said this is basically to discuss the common threat of the Islamic State. We know that Russia has diverse tools in the country. These include regional organizations working with former members of the Northern Alliance. Russia's held several conferences in Moscow and elsewhere to discuss peace talks. At the same time, we know that the GRU and other elements of the Russian military industrial complex and the national security community are active in Afghanistan and other locations nearby, some of which are some of the Central Asian countries, for example, being Russian allies. So it is possible that there were some kind of payments made by somebody to some Taliban groups. But the key question, getting back to what the important point you raised, is we don't know, was this a local initiative? Perhaps this was just the standard operating procedure of the unit that was there. Maybe revenge for what the U.S. support for the Mujahideen and the Afghan civil war of the 1980s, maybe retaliation for U.S. policies in Syria. We know the British were possibly included in the targets. So the key question the U.S. needs to determine is, was this a decision made at the highest level in Russia, or was it some local initiative? And then the U.S. response would vary accordingly. President Trump has tried to reach out and engage with President Putin, but his administration through the very tough policies in terms of sanctions and building up U.S. forces. We just had a visit by the president of Poland, and there were indications that some additional U.S. troops would move into Poland. So it's a mixed policy, trying to work with Russia where we can, but standing up to Russia where we can't.
Nikolay Surkov in Moscow, I see you shaking your head there at some of the comments of our guest in Washington, D.C. What do you think?
Well, I think that my American colleague is not seeing the whole picture. Yes, Russia is very much concerned with the situation in Afghanistan, and Russia is clearly not satisfied with the performance of the U.S. troops or with the performance of the current government in Kabul, because they are not controlling the situation in the country. And Russia was concerned with the threat of resurgent ISIS in this area for at least several years. I was there during the big maneuvers on the border of Tajikistan, and I saw how the precautions that are being taken and some preventive measures to protect the border, because Central Asia is very vulnerable and the Russian southern borders are also very vulnerable. So that is why Russia is trying to at least work in the areas that are along the border in order to prevent infiltration of militants, to prevent drug trafficking, which is huge, which is really a serious menace and threat for Russia. So, but clearly, what Russia really wanted and tried to achieve, starting from the very beginning of the American-led operation in Afghanistan, was to have a stable country in its neighborhood. But it's not working. So Taliban was chosen as the most capable and credible force in Afghanistan that can actually prevent the resurgence of ISIS or other radical group, and that can control the situation and contain the drug trafficking as well. Because these are the goals, and what I heard that some assistance was provided and some contacts were held, but only in order to secure the areas which are near the border, because this is the problem, the most serious threat and the most serious concern. But Russia is not trying to influence the situation in Afghanistan as a whole, because what we now see is the collapse of the government in Kabul, which is controlling only the capital and several big cities, and all the rest is now suffering from anarchy, all the rest of the countries.
Well, let's put those points to Omar Zaghilwal in Kabul. The Russians are simply there to help stabilize. They want to take put a cap on the drug trafficking. The Taliban are a mighty force that may be able to do that. That's what he's saying. Do you agree with that? Do you agree with any of that?
Well, no. First of all, I don't agree with the bleak picture that our Russian colleague painted of the current state of the Afghan government. No, it hasn't come to that, God forbids. And just to correct, I do not, and our Russian colleagues did not ruled it out either. I'm sure that there is some sort of support given to the Taliban, whether it is for ISIS or for other purposes. There's no doubt there is contact, but that contact with the Taliban is not only established by Russia, other countries as well, including the US, have contact with the Taliban. European countries do. All regional and neighboring countries, probably with the exception of India, have established contacts in meetings with the Taliban. So we would not want to Russia to be helpful, no doubt, to the peace process, but we certainly would not want to recommend to Russia to take sides. That this party is a stronger party, particularly if it's a non-state actor, the Taliban, versus the government, and therefore they're putting their eggs in that basket. That would be dangerous.
But Omar Zaghilwal, the great game continues in Afghanistan. The world powers are still there, and now we're talking in contemporary times rather than the British. We're talking about the Americans and the Russians. It's the US's longest war that it's been fighting. Do you have credible partners for peace then in the US, in Russia, in the world powers?
I think, well, first of all, the past 1 year, because I participated in the meetings that Russia hosted, Russia played very constructively. The intra-Afghan talks, in fact, started in Russia, and Russia did not interfere with the intra-Afghan talks. And it was from there that it was then the third intra-Afghan meeting was shifted to Doha, and we had it there. And those interactions were extremely helpful. Russia, despite of its differences with the US on other fronts, at least in the past 1 year that I've been involved in the peace talks, has narrowed its differences significantly, and I believe is acting responsibly. And we do need other countries as well. China, for example, certainly can play a very constructive role. Pakistan, for whatever the past has been, can play a very constructive role. Iran, for that matter, as well, and also other regional countries. My hope is that the reputation of, let's say, other rivalries, regional and international, is not played out in Afghanistan. It has not been helpful to the world. It has not been helpful to the region, and it certainly has been catastrophic to Afghanistan.
Well, let's bring in Richard Weitz here from Washington, D.C. I want to put some of Mr. Zakhilwal's comments to you. But before I do, this is the US's longest-lasting war. President Donald Trump needs to get his troops out. He said that he wants foreign involvement to come to an end. This was an election promise. We're in an election year. You know, what does he think about Afghanistan? Where does Afghanistan rate on his radar?
Good question. He does want to end the U.S. military deployments in Afghanistan, like previous U.S. presidents. But like previous U.S. presidents, he's not willing to pull them out until the conditions are right. So what we've seen is the U.S. trying to negotiate a peace agreement with the Taliban that would also involve the Afghan government, that would create the conditions that will allow the U.S. to leave. They haven't succeeded in that. And so this is going to leave this question probably to whoever becomes, President Trump's reelected or Vice President Biden's becomes president. They'll need to do a review of Afghan policy to decide. But also in terms of the relative importance of Afghanistan, maybe not the highest. He's been very concerned about Korea, economy, immigration, and so on. So that's one reason, going back to your earlier question, if there was some item to this about this issue in the intelligence briefs, he may not have focused on it because it isn't his highest priority, Afghan policy.
Omar Zakhilwal, it's not the president's highest priority. Afghanistan is not the president's highest priority. That's what our guest in DC is saying. Does that disappoint you?
So far, no, actually. Despite what the views about President Trump are in the U.S. And the news that he generates, I think his moves with respect to peace in Afghanistan were bold. I think it has created a real opportunity after so many years. And I do believe that if we go down that path, that peace in Afghanistan is possible. So President Trump's moves, at least in Afghanistan, and of course the U.S. is none of my business, have not disappointed me, no.
Nikolay Surkov in Russia, do you have a trust in President Donald Trump's strategy on Afghanistan? What does Russia make of that strategy?
Well, we do. At the current moment, we don't see any efficient strategy for Afghanistan. As far as we know, the U.S. troops are only capable of protecting their own bases and providing at least the security for their own personnel, and that is all they can do. Actually, what Russia really wanted from them was to fight the drug trafficking and drug production. Russia expected that the U.S. will build an efficient administration in Kabul. None of that happened. This is the problem. And still, some of the military think that massive U.S. presence in Afghanistan is dangerous for Russia, so they will welcome the U.S. withdrawal. But still, there is this problem of who will actually guarantee the stability of Afghanistan. And that is why Russia is actually working with contingency policies. And lots of effort is being paid now to prepare for some emergency situations when we have either resurgent ISIS or another crisis in Afghanistan, in order to protect at least the borders of our partners in Central Asia. So this is the story, and I don't think that Russia will really try to push the Americans out. The sentiment in Moscow was that the Americans came there, they broke the country, so now it's their job to fix it. There must be a responsible withdrawal, not just a withdrawal without any serious strategy. But we don't see any at all. This is the problem. There is no exit strategy for Afghanistan that will leave a stable and sustainable state in this country. This is very dangerous for the whole region. That will actually be a threat for Central Asia. That will be a problem for Pakistan and even for Iran from some point. So Currently, Russia is very much concerned with the situation because even the US failed to do something about Afghanistan. The strongest world power actually failed to stabilize this country. So it will be a major headache for the region from the Russian point of view.
Thank you very much. That was a fascinating discussion. I want to thank all of our guests, Richard Weitz, Nikolay Surkov and Omar Zakhilwal, and you too as well. And you can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Imran Khan, and the whole team here in Doha, bye for now.